Welcome back to the channel. It's Roberto with Full Curl Precision again. For tonight's topic, we're going to keep it very simple. It's about having realistic expectations with whatever cartridge you have. Now, there's been some others that do videos to talk about, like minimums that they prefer for a certain game. So, whether it's a minimum for elk, minimum for moose, minimum for deer, whatever the case is. And while I do agree with a lot of them because you should actually be an ethical hunter, that's the idea. Do you need necessarily big certain cartridges? Well, the answer is it depends. This is why it's talking about being realistic. What are your expectations? For instance, I'm going to put this scenario out. Let's say you and I are hunting together and we're sitting on the edge of a field and we have a herd of elk at 200 yards. That's really not that far for most rifles. It's really not that far for most shooters, considering especially the size of the elk. Now, we're not going to say that you're shooting some trophy bull or anything like that, but let's say they're cow elk. What are some realistic expectations of certain cartridges? What kind of damage can you expect? Well, as you know by now, if you've watched the channel before, I'm a big 270 Winchester fan. But at the same time, I'm not unrealistic about it. I know that it has its limitations. Is a 270 going to be as effective on a large animal like an elk as a 300 Win Mag? Well, the short answer is no. But I'm going to turn the camera around and you look at the cartridges side by side and you'll kind of get an idea what I'm talking about. So this is a hand load in 270 Winchester right here. It's a good round. This particular load this is a 150 grain Nosler AccuBond long range. It's a bonded. It's a little on the softer side of a bonded, but it's still a good bonded bullet. As a matter of fact, this specific load I used to kill my first elk this past season. A good sized calf. Not the biggest, obviously, by any stretch of the imagination, but it had really good penetration, and it did the trick. And then right next to it is a factory load offering from Federal. This is a 300 Win Mag with a 185 grain Berger. Now, again, if you look at these, obviously you see there's a significant difference in your powder reservoir, but even bullet diameter. And yes, bullet diameter does play a large part in this, obviously, the size of the hole, because the bullets do expand. So if you're starting off with a larger diameter to begin with, like the 300 compared to a 270, you're going to end up with a larger expansion. And at 200 yards, that's not far enough to be really worried about cross-sectional density. That has to do with, and if I turn it, you can see just how tighter of a hole that 270 is compared to the 30 cal. Therefore, it'll sneak through material a little easier. And that may not necessarily be a problem depending on what you're shooting. And so the thing is, it's being realistic. You can throw a 180 grain bullet out of a 300 Win Mag with the right load at well over 3,100 feet per second. That's not uncommon. You can do, and for my hand load right here with this 150 grain, I'm doing this at 2,950 feet per second. So I'm not using as heavy of a bullet, and it's not pushing it as hard as the 300. But does that mean I can't be realistic and go, hey, I don't need to have a Magnum for reasonable ranges? And the answer is no. I'm not being unrealistic. This obviously does kill elk. A lot of guys use this to kill elk. But am I going to try to attempt to use this load on an elk of any size past 400 yards? And the answer is no. It still has enough velocity at 400 yards. It's over 2,100 feet per second. As a matter of fact, if I go onto the computer, and I'll pull this up here. Once I get it pulled up fully, here we go. We're going to go over to the Federal Ballistics site. If I type in the information, for instance, so this is a hand load. It is a 150 grain, muzzle velocity of 2950. The G1BC of 0.591. And let's see, my scope height right now sits at, I'm a little bit higher, 200 yards is my zero range. And we're going to do my increments at 100 yards, my altitude at 5,000 feet, because that's what we're at. And we're going to do a max of 500 yards. And when I pull it up, you can see that even at 500 yards, I still have 2,320 feet per second. So it's actually hitting with a good amount. But being realistic and knowing how tough elk are, would I feel comfortable using this on an elk past 400? And for me personally, no. Because I like the idea of having a little bit more. Whenever you're using a tougher bullet like a bonded compared to a cup and core, or if you're using a monolithic, the better your velocity, the better the expansion. And that's kind of important. You don't want the bullet to blow up, but you want that bullet to expand at a decent rate. And so if I can keep it at those kinds of ranges, then I will get pretty good penetration and a good wound channel. Now, again, is this going to be as hard hitting at 400 yards as, let's say, this load from the Winchester, 300 Win Mag? Honestly, it's not. And I'm going to kind of prove that point here. So if I turn the box around here, now, while it's going a little slower, one of the things about the energy is it's going to be a little higher. This particular load starts off a little slower, but the thing is, this is not really the best that you can do with a 300 Win Mag, not by any stretch of the imagination. And I'll show you what I mean. If I go into my Gordon's reloading tool, and I'll select off this, here we go, we'll go through this, the 300, let's see, here we go. Go through the plethora 300 Win Mag. Apply a load. We're going to select the bullet here. We're going to go with a... So for sake of argument, we're going to keep the bullet type the same. We're going to go with a 190 grain AccuBond long range. And we can push this up to 64,000. So we have a little bit more of a threshold. And we're going to change this out to Hodgdon H1000, which is actually a very common powder to be using for this cartridge. So we're going to do that right there. And we're going to go with 75 grains. Then we can go a little bit more. We're going to go to 80. That's a little much. So let's see. We're going to go with 78.5. Now we can go a little higher. So let's try 79. Right there. Okay. So according to the Gordon's reloading tool, the 300 Win Mag using factory lengths with the Nosler AccuBond long range 190 grain and that's not entirely accurate in that number, but that's irrelevant. I believe it's like a point. It's supposed to be like 0.597. I'll have to change that over. But anyway, look at this. If you're pushing it right up into that red line area, you can get that bullet going basically 3,000 feet per second. So we're just going to round that off and say 3,000 feet per second. So it goes, let's do 78.9. Actually, we can go a little. There we go. So staying a little closer to that bottom, there you go. We're right at 3,000 feet per second. That's moving pretty quick. If we go back and we go to the Federal Ballistics app. Okay, hand load. We're doing this time 190 grain. And we're going 3,000 feet per second. And that's a 0.597. And we're doing everything else the same. Calculate. Here you go. Look at this. You're talking about a very flat trajectory. You're still well over, at 500 yards, you're still well over 2,000 feet per second. Look at that. 2370 with a lot more energy. So here's the thing. If I was going to be hunting out to 500 and maybe even 600 yards, let's extend the range on this. Let's say we're going to bring this out. We're going to take this all the way out to 800 yards. What's a realistic expectation? If we're trying to stay over 2,000 feet per second for adequate impact and energy, look at that. You're still over 8. At 800 yards, you still have plenty. So the thing is being realistic with what your cartridge can do. Now, would I ever use a 6.5 Creedmoor to be taking shots on elk at those ranges? No. I also wouldn't do that with a 270 as well. I wouldn't do that with a 30-06. For those kinds of ranges, when you're getting out there past 400 yards, you need to be more realistic and be using a Magnum. It just is more ethical. Now, I get it. When you're looking at that compared to a standard 270, if I go back over here, you can see that's going to obviously have a lot more recoil. But the thing is, again, they invented these things called muzzle brakes. It makes life a lot nicer. It's not like rifles are that much harder to get with a muzzle brake if you don't already have one, or get one put on your rifle, whatever the case is. Whatever the case is, no matter how you look at this, the 300 Win Mag is clearly going to be more ethical on larger game. But is it really necessary when it comes to things like whitetails or mule deer? Well, no, because you're not talking the same type of animal. So the thing is, you have to match your cartridge to your game. It doesn't make sense to just simply go, oh, well, I have this 223 and I'm really good with it. Let's say you live somewhere down south where the whitetails are nor as big, and maybe most of your shots are happening within 100 yards, and you're having good success with your 223 or 5.56. Should you take that out west and expect to have the same thing when you're hunting, elk? No. And I get that some people are going to be upset with that, but you know what? Your feelings are less important than being ethical on the animal. Now, again, here's the thing. Do you need to go out and buy a Magnum to hunt elk? No. But what you do need to do is be realistic with what your expectations are. What's your realistic shooting range? What kind of elk hunting are we talking about? Are you just out here to get a cow? Or are you after some monster bull? Because here's the thing. Even if you go with a big mature cow, you could be looking at 600 to 700 pound animal. But it's not uncommon for a big mature bull to be 900 to 1,000 pounds. So if you're looking at that, that's a significant change in body mass. And anyone who's been hunting long enough can tell you, it doesn't matter if you're hunting hogs, hunting bears, hunting whitetail, pronghorn. If you look at the structure of a male compared to the structure of a female, there's a lot more muscle mass and thickness of hide on the front of the animal. Hogs actually develop a cartilage shield over their vitals. So you're having to punch through that. Excuse me. But, you need to, even if you're going to use the same rifle that you currently have, let's say 243, 6.5 Creedmoor, find a good bullet construction. Don't use basic cup and cores. You want to go into something like a monolithic, or you want to go into something like a bonded, like these Nosler AccuBond long range, or like a Norma Bond Strike. The reason is, or like a Spear Impact. You want to have a bullet that's going to be able to not only expand, but you want it to be able to hold together and sink deep. And that's a very important fact. But you also need to be able to remember velocity. Your velocities need to be higher, because faster velocities means that bullet hits with more authority at range. That's an important detail. And here's the thing where I go. This is why my personal minimum for elk is the 270. Is this. Because with the same weight bullet out of a 270, compared to any of the 6.5 Creedmoor, anything in those smaller ones, you're not going to be able to get the same velocities as a standard 270. It just doesn't happen. Now, again, you're going to want to go with a slightly heavier bullet like I did. I went with a 150 grain. There are, whether you're getting a Nosler Partition, which doesn't have the greatest, but there's also AccuBonds, AccuBond long range. If you have the ability to hand load, great. And if you don't, when you're doing these kinds of hunts, remember, when you're doing this, you're spending all this money to come out here anyway. Get premium ammunition. Don't go cheap on it. You're already spending a lot to come out here and hunt. So if you're going to do that, why cheap out on the bullet? That's going to be what actually allows you to make an ethical kill on the animal. Get good ammunition. Practice, practice, practice. But also be realistic with your range. If you're not good, regardless of how accurate your rifle is, if you don't feel comfortable past 300, don't go past 300. Period. For me, I've practiced, and I'm comfortable with 400, 420 yards. So I feel comfortable with a good steady rest to be able to take that kind of a shot. But I've also practiced it. So again, being realistic with what your expectations are. And I'm just using these two as a comparison, the 270 Winchester to the 300 Win Mag. Do you have to use these two? No. Maybe you have a 30-06. Great. That'll do it. Just take the time to get a good load. One of my favorite loads in general to hunt with, well, not so much loads as it is bullet type, are the Federal Terminal Ascent and the Federal Trophy Bonded. Both have the same basic construction, where the top half of the bullet is a bonded core, and then the bottom half is a copper alloy shank. So it can only expand so much and then just sinks deep. In the 270, you have 136 grain. I think it's a 175 grain in the 30-06. Yeah. Those are great options. They'll do a good job on both deer and elk. So, again, you need to be cognizant of what you're trying to accomplish. Remember, you're out here. If you're out here to hunt, you're here to get the animal. You're not here to torture it. So, select a good bullet. You don't have to go out and necessarily buy a new rifle. Just be realistic with your ranges. Know what the thing can do. One of the big, it's kind of like the reason why so many people dog on the 6.5 Creedmoor has nothing to do with its actual capabilities. It has to do with the fact that idiots misuse it and try to claim it's this end-all be-all cartridge because it's so proficient. No, it's not. It's basically a gutless cartridge in many ways. Compared to Magnums, compared to even its own big brother, the 6.5 PRC, it's a fairly gutless cartridge. 2,700 feet per second is not fast. Is it accurate? Yes. Is it a good cartridge? Yes. Is it as fast as it should be to be ethical on elk past 400 yards? No. There's only so much that BC can make up for. So, if you have a 6.5 Creedmoor, learn to be realistic with it. It's a great whitetail cartridge. It's great for pronghorn, even great on mule deer. And when I say that, I'm talking about, shots at 400, 500, even 600 yards. But when it comes to taking elk, the last thing you want to do is having to empty your rifle on the animal. You want 1, maybe 2 shots max, and the thing goes down. You don't want to be having to put 5 or 6 shots into an animal. That's not ethical. I don't care how you feel about it. That's not ethical. So, at the end of the day, have fun, enjoy, practice, but be realistic with what your expectations are. It is always easier to get a little closer to get a better shot than it is to have to chase a wounded animal. So keep that in mind. By all means, use what you got. But if what you got isn't as good as you think it is, it doesn't hurt to try to plan now, get something new. I'm not saying you have to get anything expensive. Just upgrade to something else and practice with it and get good with it. That's all we have for tonight. We'll talk to you again. I appreciate it. Please like, subscribe, share, comment, and we'll see you on the next one.